Mirror's Edge is a parkour free-running game where the main goal is to get from point A to point B as fast as humanly possible. Unless you're a speedrunner, of course, because then you'll be doing things that no human could ever do at any point in history, ever. That would literally be impossible, dude. Just look at this. Taking a look at this prototype footage of the game, which I would guess was made in around 2006 or 2007, it looks as if they potentially got a lot of the overall feel of this game from the earlier versions. As you can see, the enemies are red, which is the main color scheme for the game itself, if you think of runner's vision. I think, and don't take my word for this because it's just speculation, when they first were creating the game, they used these red models as a placeholder for any actual models that would be seen in the game. And when they went further into development, they looked back and thought, hey, you know, it would be easier if every place the player needed to go was red, just like with the model. Also, can we just take a second to look at the death animation of the soldier getting shot and how he just kind of falls over? I thought that was kind of funny. If you listen carefully, and again, this is just speculation, but the actor's voice sounds a little deeper, which leads me to believe that the original game was supposed to feature a male character instead of a female. I'm actually very curious to see how the game story would have played out if the main character were to be a male. Would he be a stereotypical badass who kills everyone and walks away slowly while an explosion happens in the background? Guess we'll never know. Also, really quickly, I just wanted to point out how you're on the street in this prototype, which is cool because you only really go onto the street, I think, once overall in the game, and you're only there for like 2 minutes or so that's pretty sick. Speaking of the character look, let's take a minute to talk about the character design of Faith. While in both games, she still has the tattoo on her right eye, and in some pictures, the tattoo on her right shoulder, you can see that for whatever reason, they changed her hairstyle, and that's it. They didn't change the character much besides the clothes, where in the first game, she's wearing a black tank top and those cool Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle looking shoes. In Mirror's Edge Catalyst, she's wearing a sort of vest-style shirt on top of the tank top. She would probably just keep things inside of those pockets, but we don't really get to ever see anything like that inside of the game itself, so it could actually be for anything. Of course, the model of Faith's character is a much higher quality upgrade from the first game, seeing that the second game was released around 8 years after the first, and even though the games share a lot of similarities between each other, they were actually made on 2 separate engines. Most of you already know, seeing as DICE usually uses their own Frostbite engine for the games in trailers, but what you may not have known is that the first Mirror's Edge game was actually made entirely on the Unreal engine back while the game was in development before its release in 2008. Moving the second game over to the Frostbite engine definitely opened up the game to look much better than its predecessor, but that would also be because the second game was released around 8 years after the first game. While Mirror's Edge Catalyst was announced at E3 back in 2014 with some conceptual gameplay that I'll show here in a second, the first Mirror's Edge was actually officially announced in June of 2007 by EA, and the first gameplay was first shown at the Game Developers Conference in San Francisco in February of 2008. I think it's kind of funny how even all the way back in 2008 they were showing actual gameplay for the game instead of just pre-rendered cutscenes or anything from the actual game engine itself. On the other hand, Mirror's Edge Catalyst was announced in 2014 at E3 with some conceptual footage alongside a trailer for the game. Honestly, looking at this now makes me want to play the game again, so let's roll the footage on that.
It could give them a sense that, well, you shouldn't mess around with Faith.
They can teach us a lot about the moves that we have in the game and how we can also expand on it.
We're building on the first Mirror's Edge when it comes to the moveset that Faith has.
Everything is geared towards traversing and navigating this environment. We want the player to be able to experiment and find different paths in the environment.
You know that you can get there, but how? And that's when you explore, not just the environment, but also what is it that Faith can do.
So for the skilled player, they might find the quickest, the fastest, the most rewarding path for them. Somebody with less skill might find a safer, longer route.
It's important for us that everybody who wants to play the game can play the game. And not only are we building a broad moveset, we're also building combat with the moveset in mind.
You would analyze the geometry in a combat encounter to see how you can use that against the enemies.
As you may know, the first Mirror's Edge game is a pretty linear game, where the paths set are pretty much set in stone until you decide to break out of those boundaries using glitches or cheats. Open world is obviously not new, especially to the few parkour games that do exist out there, such as Dying Light or Assassin's Creed, but what I think is cool is how in-depth everything is in Mirror's Edge. The main focus of both games are to be able to climb up every wall and to run on every surface and slide down every slope. Since Mirror's Edge Catalyst was developed fully as an open world game, there are much better ways to hide different things inside the game. And what better thing to hide inside of such a big game than Easter eggs. Both Mirror's Edge games have a vast amount of Easter eggs in them, with things ranging from a nod to popular other franchises to a giant rat running down the road. We'd have to make an entire other video to talk about just solely the Easter eggs of these games, but let's talk about a couple of my favorite ones.
Dogen wants this delivered for his restaurant. It's a very special cake. Quite fragile, you understand.
So that's it. The cake was a lie. I'll tell Dogen.
I'd like to end off this video with a few fun facts about both games. The first being that there's actually an iOS version of Mirror's Edge that isn't actually in first person, but uses more of a third person or side-scroller view, which actually looks pretty cool in my opinion. Mirror's Edge Catalyst isn't actually a sequel to the first Mirror's Edge, but is actually a complete reboot from the ground up of the game. DICE wanted to focus more on the main character Faith and her origin story, but felt as if the first game got in the way of that, so they decided to completely redo the story with a brand new game. While running around in the open world of Mirror's Edge Catalyst, you may or may not have noticed that the game actually doesn't have a single loading screen. Of course, you have your intro loading screen when you first load up the game or load into a mission, but you can actually run around the entire map without having to do any sort of loading or interruptions in gameplay. Upon completion of Mirror's Edge Catalyst, you can actually play the game from the beginning with everything you unlock in your first playthrough. I'm bringing this up because I actually had no idea this existed until now, and I'm actually very sad because this feature made the game a whole lot more fun in my eyes. If you've played the first game, which I assume you have because you're here watching this video, you may have noticed that in the gameplay of the first game, you can actually pick up someone's gun after killing them and shoot other people. DICE realized while making the second game that this actually got rid of a lot of the flow that the game was marketed off of and completely took it out of Catalyst, which, in my opinion, it was a very good thing to do. But that about wraps up our video on the evolution of Mirror's Edge. You can click the annotation on screen now if you'd like to check out our other videos, and make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed. And yeah, that's about it for me. Thanks for watching.